Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome from snowy, cold England. I wish I was there to join you in person today. I'm delighted to be able to be part of the International Convention on Indonesian Upstream Oil and Gas for a short talk on the energy insurance market outlook and how the market can support the ambitious projects you have to reach your target goals for oil and gas production, and the challenges that the market does represent in providing support for those projects. If I could have my slides up, please. So I just want to run through a role of insurance in general terms. I think it's always useful to look at that from a historic context, and then how we access the global marketplace today, because the upstream energy insurance market is very much a global marketplace, and it's a very dynamic marketplace as well. It changes continuously. And so we'll look at the current state of that market and what we can expect from it. And then we'll look at the coverages that are available for the projects that we're anticipating will take place in Indonesia, and then the challenges that we know we should face and be prepared for. And then I'll conclude my talk by a reminder of why we are here as insurance providers to the energy industry. I think it's important to think about that role of insurance. So when we started with insurance as an industry, it was in the UK, and it was when UK ship owners in the 17th century were embarking upon trading activities across the world, indeed to Indonesia, to bring back spices and so on to the UK market, the English market. And that entrepreneurial spirit, to achieve it, these ship owners really required some guarantee that if the ship didn't return from what was a really hazardous voyage, that they could have access to capital in order to finance the building of a new ship and to continue that entrepreneurial activity. And so it is today. The ship owners are now the oil and gas companies. The oil and gas companies don't negotiate with the capital providers, which in those days were individual wealthy people in England, but today they are the big insurance companies. And so the oil companies employ a broker like myself to negotiate on their behalf, and the capital providers employ an underwriter in the form of an insurance company employee to underwrite the risks on their behalf. But that function doesn't change, and today's emphasis comes a lot from the banks, from the lenders to these projects. And the better insurance solutions that we can put together, then the more bankable the project is, and the more likely we get preferable terms from the lenders to support these projects. So that's a key role that insurance plays today. And when we're looking to access the most effective insurance for the big global offshore projects, we go around the world to do it. This is a map of all the offices that Marsh has around the globe that practice oil and gas insurance. We actually operate out of 12 key hubs, which is where we are, where we have our centers of excellence, if you like, in what is a very complex, very specific class of insurance. And there are three I would highlight as being the dominant hubs for us: London, Dubai, and Singapore. And in today's world, London probably represents about 70% of all the offshore energy insurance transacted globally. And then Singapore, they're at about 15%, and Dubai about 10%. So London is very much the dominant market. But I would emphasize that this is a dynamic picture, and it was never always the case. In my career, at one stage, Paris was a very strong market for international upstream energy business, and indeed Oslo has been in the past as well. So we always want to go where we can find the best solutions, the best access to capital. And we also want to make sure that the London market doesn't feel it has any right to the business. It has to compete to maintain its relevance and indeed dominance in this marketplace. It's driven essentially by supply and demand. The demand for capacity is high, then we go to the areas of the market that are able to supply the insurance capital we need. And that does, I say, vary. So if we have the next slide, please. We talk in our marketplace about a cyclical world of insurance. It goes through that period of what we call being a hard market, where conditions are tough to negotiate, premiums rise, and then it transforms into a soft market. And the drivers behind it are essentially profitability and that supply and demand economics. So in the hard market environment, we've had losses in the market, we've had a withdrawal of capacity, and the underwriters start limiting the amount of coverage available and pushing up pricing. But as profitability returns, more capital comes into the market, the pricing becomes more competitive, the terms become broader, until such time as we start experiencing losses into the market again. And I would say that in today's world, we're at about 7 o'clock, and that's a pretty good place to be. So we've been through a tougher period of the market. We're now entering one where I would say it was a stable rating environment. We've had a low level of loss activity, and some say that's brought about by the sort of low level of economic activity during the pandemic. And it's also brought about, there's a reduced amount of revenue coming through contractors and construction activities, again, largely due to pandemic, but also due to depressed oil prices, really since late 2014, 2015. But in that profitability, a profitable area, we've seen new markets come in and an oversupply of capacities. That puts us at about 7 o'clock, which is a good place to be. But we also have to recognize today that we are seeing the first pressures from the energy transition on the upstream market. So if our insurers think they can get more premium through from offshore wind power generation activity on the construction side, it may reduce their appetite to offshore oil and gas. So that may lessen the competition that we can create in the market for the offshore oil and gas projects. But as a snapshot today, we have about $7 billion of capital that's available per risk that we place. That seems like a huge amount of money, but it absolutely is required for some of the key assets at risk in the upstream oil and gas sector. These are some of the largest, most complex, most expensive industrial assets built in the world. But we only have an annual premium against that in the commercial market of about $2 billion. So I would say that it is a volatile marketplace. It can change very quickly. A single loss of $7 billion could take out over 3 years of premium. So things can change through that cycle very quickly. Having said that, my view today is very positive on the outlook. All things being equal, we're very confident that support will exist for SKK's ambitious projects in Indonesia. So what coverages can we expect? Next slide, please. Fundamentally, property damage, if we think back to that historical insurance context, that remains the principal area of risk. But in the upstream energy sector, operators' extra expense or control of well coverage is also very important and significantly more complex risks than the original marine insurers would have to have faced. We also have to consider third-party liability exposures and some specific areas of risk around construction activity, which could include mobilization or demobilization. If you have a loss during the construction period and need to bring equipment back on site, that can be a very expensive element. So I'd say those are the core coverages, but there's lots of additional coverages that are also available to us. And these are some things that the lenders often require. So delay in startup insurance, advanced loss of profit, of future profits, if you like, that you can insure during construction if the construction project's delayed. And then once it goes into operation, then the business interruption or loss of production income can be insured as well. And then it's increasingly the case that projects now overlay existing assets. So you need to think about the damage to existing property that is not owned by the operator or the contractor, but belongs to other parties. but is at risk during construction. And then we also have to think about the full lifestyle. So we could have decommissioning of some assets as we install new ones. And so how do we ensure for the decommissioning risks? And then, of course, we can't lose sight of environmental liability as distinct from a third-party liability, and perhaps responsibilities that the operators have for that. And then, of course, new areas of risk, such as cyber, where we absolutely have a physical damage exposure and a control of well exposure should a cyber event take place during construction, development, or indeed operation of offshore assets. So all that is available. The market is dynamic, but in a very positive frame at the moment. But it's not without its challenges. So next slide, please. Those challenges I would highlight as fundamentally the availability and the need for a lot of information. They are high-risk projects. If we look at the right-hand side of my graph, this is a picture of 4 years' worth of losses during drilling and construction activities offshore. And it's averaging $400 million a year of losses. And the bulk of those in the yellow columns are the control of well losses. So this is a high hazard industry. The losses are significant when they happen, and therefore we need that information and a great deal of it so the underwriters can assess the risk appropriately, and they're going to need a lot of time to do so. So the insurance process is not simple. It does take a matter of weeks and months to put in place. And the appetite does change depending on the assets at risk. So pure subsea operations, much more problematic for underwriters, much less appetite there, much more challenging for us to secure support for. And then the capacity that's available, I say it's $7 billion, but we absolutely do need that for the very largest risks. And the challenge for us is probably to get an alignment across all those insurers we have to access. And for the largest risks, it could be 100 insurers. We need alignment on coverage and price across all those markets. Again, it takes time. Another aspect to consider is the operators or contractors' experience with similar projects. If they're new to the projects, then the underwriters are going to be much less confident than the support they give to those that have a long history of success in developing the deep water offshore projects. And then a challenge for us is can we make sure that our market insurance pricing matches the budgets and the financial models that have been built when the market is such a dynamic place. And then finally, I would touch on the need again, highlighted earlier, for ESG considerations. Underwriters are going to look to have ESG as part of their underwriting process, and we're seeing that today accelerate, if you like, with some specific information requirements around it to satisfy them of the, if you like, the strength of the ESG credentials of the project, notwithstanding it is by its nature oil and gas related. So satisfying all our needs for insurance, how do we go about selecting our markets? There are a number of factors, the next slide please, which influence our selection of insurers. And again, it's underwriting appetite. We want the insurers that like the risks that we're going to place, because then we can expect to get a better product, a better price from them. And that really often comes from their experience. You look at the right-hand side, we've got FLNG, we've got FPSOs, we've got platforms, we've got pipelines, subsea assets we've talked about. It could be just modification to existing assets, and we've got those decommissioning risks. And individual underwriters may have different appetite for different types just because of the way that they've experienced losses during their careers. So it's up to us as brokers to know where to go to get the best result from the best, most suitable markets. And we want to build capacity with carriers that can take significant risks. So our largest insurers will risk $300 to $400 million on any one project, and it's much more efficient and it tends to be more cost effective. We target those carriers that are able to commit significant capacity. They do bring added services such as risk engineering support to help manage the risk of the large projects, because they've seen a big variety of them around the globe. But of course, claims paying ability, that financial security, the rating that they have is absolutely a fundamental requirement. And the banks, the lenders will insist on a certain level of financial security from the rating agencies in order that those insurers can actually qualify to provide support. So we know that when or if the losses happen, the capital will be available to meet the obligations under the contract. And we also need those insurers to be there for the long term. The worst situation we can get in is if we have a project that's delayed, and it could be a pandemic or other factors at play, and we have to replace insurers or reinsurers during the construction period. That's a very difficult task for us to achieve. So we want to make sure those insurers ideally are there for not only the duration of the contract, but there for the operational phase as well, because they'll know most about the project when it goes into operations. And then I would also emphasize that sometimes the global licenses, having global insurers is really quite helpful, because some of the largest projects, we could be sourcing material, equipment from a number of different construction yards around the globe that are then being brought together at one site. And therefore we need to be able to insure those assets at the construction yards as well at the construction site. And then finally, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that ours is a relationship business. We have clients build relationships with insurers over time, and those relationships can always come into play whenever we look to place risks for our clients. So lots of complex issues around what we need to do to access insurance, how we go about it, what insurers we select, and recognizing that market environment is changing all the time. There's one final reminder of why we're here. The next slide, please. I can share with you the pictures of Deepwater Horizon, the rig that caught fire and sank on a well blowout in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010 with the tragic loss of life. It highlights what a high-risk industry this is. It highlights the need for the reinsurance markets to be available, provide capital in the event of loss, the experts that they can appoint to help in the handling of a claim, the expertise they have in delivering products that are effective for indemnification of losses from these events, and the ability to pay claims through a complex series process that we involve in the event of loss. But here, this platform, the claim for $450 million to the platform itself was paid within 1 week of the event by the insurers. So there's the example of the access to capital that the operators and the construction company needed. This loss itself is estimated to cost BP more than $60 billion. Again, a scale of the risks involved and the need for comprehensive insurance solutions to cover you in the moments that matter. Thank you very much.